Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Public Library Division session, Save As, Managing and Preserving Your Digital Life. We are so excited that you are joining us for another OLA 2020 session. My name is Allison Hayes, and I am the Chair-elect of the Public Library Division. I'm very excited to moderate this session, and I am also very excited to introduce our speaker, who is Caitlin Seagraves. She is the Digital Literacy Associate at the Central Library of the Tulsa City County Library System. So that means she runs the Digital Literacy Lab, which is a digital learning center and facilitates technology programming for all ages, including web literacy and coding. She also organizes the Django Girls Tulsa and Railsbridge Tulsa and is a volunteer with Techlahoma, which is a nonprofit that works to engage tech talent in Oklahoma and bring free and high-tech programs to Oklahomans. So after this session, you guys are all going to have to go check that out. She has also served as the National Director of Operations and National Director of Administration for Alpha Sigma Kappa Women in Technical Studies, an organization that empowers and supports collegiate women in STEM majors and women in STEM fields. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Caitlin. I'm going to let her share her screen, and we'll let you take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Allison. I appreciate it. So today we are going to be talking about managing and preserving your digital life. This talk was adapted after a series of classes that we teach fairly often at Central Library and Tulsa City County Library. But I will start off with an introduction. Allison gave me a great one. My name is Caitlin. I work at Central Library. If you've ever been to downtown Tulsa, it's a beautiful space. And I run the lab that's on the second floor of the building. So if you ever come visit, make sure you come and see me. All of today's resources, the handouts, the slides, are available at this link here. So this is a live link. Once you go to this page, it will take you to a Google Drive that has handouts that I pass out, as well as resources that I use in putting these talks together. So hopefully that is a helpful resource for you. We are going to kind of touch on three major topics today, and we're not going to go super in depth to any of them. So if you have questions later, please feel free to ask. But the first thing we're going to talk about is personal digital archiving, what that is. We're going to look at digitization resources, and then we're going to talk about digital estate planning, which is kind of a new topic for a lot of people. This presentation that I'm doing today was adapted from a series of classes we teach at Tulsa City County Library. We have a series of classes called Saving Stuff, Digital Preservation for the Family Historian. And when I teach it, it's usually, I usually do it in September. It's a 5-week month. We'll meet once a week at the same time and cover a different topic each time. The title of this is actually adapted from an article in Computers and Libraries and was developed by staff at Athens-Clarke County Library. They have a digital media center there. The way that they presented this series of classes was a little different than what we do. They kind of took each session to focus on a different type of format. So they would work on digitizing tapes the first week and then digitizing VHS the next week. So mine looks a little different, but it's a great resource, Computers and Libraries. I link to the article on my resources page. The 5 weeks that we break it into, we start with a digital archiving class where we talk about how you save information, how you can save information about your information, and kind of best practices for that. The second week, we have a digitization class. And in that class, we actually go through and do hands-on demonstrations of all of the digitization equipment we have available at the library. This is a class I actually teach monthly at the library because there is such an interest in digitization. And it's always better to have kind of a smaller group for it because it is such a high-touch, lots of questions type of class. The third week, we did a DIY oral histories class. Because I think oral histories can be a really interesting way to capture family history. And I had a librarian, and I wish I had her name at hand. She was from the OSU library system, and they've got a really great oral history collection that you can find more information about at the Oklahoma State University Libraries page. The fourth week, we did a class using Photoshop where we actually went through and repaired photographs. So if you've got old family photos, there might be some rips, tears, discoloration. We talk about ways that you can kind of restore some of those images. And then the last week is usually kind of the most macabre topic, where we talk about digital estate planning and ways that you can prepare your digital assets to be passed on in the event that something happens to you. So this is kind of the breakdown, and we're going to go ahead and get started with digital archiving. So the way that I approach digital archiving is a lot more casual than a lot of people I have talked to, or a lot of reading I've done up on the topic. If we have any archivists who are watching this, librarians, I do not have an MLIS. I didn't attend library school, and I don't have the formal education that a lot of archivists have. But I kind of developed this DIY way of looking at digital archiving based on questions that I was getting from library customers. So they were using our scanners, and then their next question was, how do I name my files? So when talking about digital archiving, I kind of break it up into why, what, where, and how, and work through that list of questions. The first question I always like to answer in any class is, why are we talking about this? The way we save our family history has changed pretty dramatically in even the last 20 years. My mom is a big scrapbooker, and she used to take family photos and cut them up and tape them into her creative memory scrapbook, use glue and corners and crinkle cut scissors. It looks great. I hate scrapbooking so much in that it is really hard to unstick things that have been stuck. But rather than flipping through the old family photo books, a lot of people prefer to have these things digitally in addition to having the physical stuff. So rather than having the old photo boxes or scrapbooks, flipping through your Google Drive is kind of a new way of looking through family photos. We also are talking about this because technology has changed a lot, and especially how we store information. If you have an office at home, you may have a file cabinet where you keep all your financial documents for the last 6 years. I don't do that. Most of them are stored online on my computer. It's very easy to delete past years because I can just go through and hit right-click delete. And then, of course, nobody wants to lose their files. If you can't find a file, it functionally does not exist. So talking about digital archiving and ways that you can better save your information can prevent you some heartache in the future. Now, when we're talking about this, there are really two main ways you can ensure long-term access to your files. The first one being backing up your files, and the second one being naming and organizing your files in a way that you can find them later. So the question, what am I saving, can be answered fairly easily. For the most part, when we're working with digital archives, we're looking at photos. So it's a JPEG or a TIFF format. We're working with audio files, which are often MP3 files or WAV files. Videos can be anything from an MP4 to insert M4A, I think is what Apple calls them. Documents, often saved as PDFs or TIFFs. Whatever you're saving in this, the thing that you definitely want to keep in mind is that you are making sure you're saving and filing away the most up-to-date file types as possible. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. The next question, where are you saving your files? Largely, the places that you save your files are kind of broken down into local storage, external storage, and cloud services. So local storage can mean any number of things. If you have a cell phone, that's considered local storage because you have photos on your cell phone if you have a camera on there. We have desktop computers, laptops, tablets. Most of us have one or even all of these things. And between those different devices, we have all sorts of files saved. External storage can be anything from like a memory card to a flash drive or an external hard drive. And again, most of us have a combination of those types of storage devices. And then there's cloud storage. Cloud storage can be kind of an intimidating thing to talk about with a lot of users who are not as familiar or as comfortable with technology. When I talk about cloud storage with my customers, I like to describe it as easily as possible, wherein online cloud services are basically servers that are stored somewhere else. So, we use servers here at the library. I think they're up in Seattle the last time I pinged it. So we're storing our information in Seattle. So if something happens here at the library, we can still access our information, even if, you know, our server here were to crash or burn or something. Most of us already have online cloud services, and many of your customers do as well. If you have an iPhone or an iCloud account, or an Apple account, you have iCloud, which is an online cloud service. If you have a Gmail, then you have Google Drive attached to your Gmail. And then, you know, customers may be more familiar with things like Dropbox or OneDrive. So kind of walking through those different types of options is always really helpful. But you don't want to go into too much detail because every single person in the room has a different understanding or different types of technology available to them. So a question about where I save my files and why it's important to diversify where you save your files is because, you know, things can happen. Ways that you can lose your files, potential loss is usage and handling. So if you save your files onto a flash drive and your flash drive is plugged into the side of your laptop and you walk by your laptop and it snaps the flash drive in half, you often can't access those files on there. So unless they're saved somewhere else, you know, you're not going to be able to get to them. Lack of durability, you know, people used to save information onto these shiny little discs that would stick into computers and make weird noises when they, you know, go about. If one of them got scratched, you would lose some of the information about your file. I think those are called CDs. Kidding, I do know what a CD is, even if a lot of people ask me often if I do or not. And then of course there's obsolescence. You know, we used to save stuff onto floppy disks. People don't often have floppy drives at home anymore. I have one here at the library that customers can use to try to get, you know, their stuff off of a floppy disk. I don't necessarily have the software that they need to open the files. So when you're thinking about saving information, you always want to make sure that you're updating stuff to the most current format possible, because things become pretty obsolete pretty quickly. When talking about where you can save your files, there's kind of a method that a lot of experts recommend. It's called the 3-2-1 method. The idea is that you have 3 copies of your data saved on 2 local copies and then 1 offsite copy. So kind of the best version I have seen of the 3-2-1 method out in the wild is with a customer who comes into the lab to use our scanners pretty often. And what she has is a computer at home that she uses regularly. And hooked up to that computer, she has an external hard drive. And her computer is set every night to back up to her external hard drive automatically. She has a second copy of her external hard drive that she keeps in a fireproof safe. And then she also has a copy that she keeps at a bank box that she keeps some important financial documents in. I see Allison's eyes getting big. It is a lot of work to do that. And she's on a schedule where she actually goes through and switches out which drive she has hooked up to her computer monthly. So they're always getting updated once a month. And then she also uses a cloud service. So it comes through and automatically backs up her computer to a cloud service of some sort. That is a lot of work. I personally am not that competent when it comes to backing up my information, but when you do get a system that works for you, some things to keep in mind is that you want to make sure you're updating it regularly. This can mean different things for different people. The woman I spoke about earlier, she updates her external hard drives monthly. I tend to update my cloud service after I do a big bout of work. So say I sit down and I do like 8 hours of scanning in a week, I will update at the end of that week because I don't want to lose 8 hours of work in the event something happens to my computer. So whatever method you find that works for you, set a calendar notification and just make sure that you're sticking to it regularly. And if you don't do the perfect 3-2-1 method, at least make sure you're saving your stuff to some sort of cloud service. And if you don't want to pay for a ton of storage, at least make sure you're saving your most important documents to a cloud service. So just keep that in mind. So the next question we answer is kind of the how I save my files. There are a few things that you want to keep in mind when you're organizing your files, and the first one being naming. When you name your files, there's a few tips I have for you. You want to make sure you're descriptive. A good question to ask yourself is, if I see this file in 10 years, will I know what it's about without opening it? So say you have all of your tax documents saved onto your computer in an encrypted drive. You can look at your tax returns and see tax return 2019, tax return 2018, tax return 2017. And I can look at those names and not have to click open the file to know what I'm getting into. That's not necessarily going to be the case for everything, and we'll look at an example of something on the next slide. So moving on from that, another thing to keep in mind is to avoid acronyms and special characters. If you've ever saved files on a computer and tried to use like ampersands or % signs, you probably got some weird error message and it would refill it with something else. Another thing to avoid is spaces. Often a computer will automatically fill a space with a % sign, so you can get some really sloppy looking files if you try to use spaces. And then, when thinking about acronyms, if you are naming work files that maybe your coworkers will be looking at, you can use acronyms like OLA or ALA, because most of the people who look at those files will know what you're talking about. But if you are organizing your ALA papers and with the intent that maybe somebody in your family will look at them, it's unlikely they're going to know what the American Library Association is. So acronyms can be used, but use them sparingly, and also consider your audience if you are using acronyms. You want to make sure you also avoid long file names. There are some computer programs that actually can't open up file names that are longer than, say, 32 characters. They're also kind of annoying to look at if they're too long, because often they'll run off the page before you can look at the whole thing. And then another tip, whatever system that you decide to use, just make sure you're consistent with it. And a good tip is to actually, before you sit down and work to rename all of your files on your computer, figure out what system you want to use at the start of your project. I'm sure many of us have started projects and then realized halfway through that we want to change something that we've done. Save yourself that hassle by trying to think out these things ahead of time. So there's actually a really good example of file naming that Stanford Libraries put together. When I teach this class, I usually actually hand out a handout that Stanford Libraries put together that they've made available on their website and is linked on my resources page in my Google Drive that I shared with you all. And the example that they use is a schema that starts with the date _location _subject _unique number.ext. So to break this down, when naming files using this schema, you start with the date. And this is like if I'm naming photographs from like a vacation. The example I used here, I've got the date, so the date that the photos were taken. The location, I went on a trip to Boston with some friends back in 2016. So I used Boston as the location name. The subject of the image could be different for different people, but on that Boston trip, we went to Great Bay. So I went ahead and called my subject of image Great Bay and shortened it to GRTBAY. And then, when you're naming files, if you have the same prefix, it'll go through and you can name them numerically, so 1 through 30 or whatever. And then .ext is the file type, the extension of the file. So most of my photographs, if they were taken with my phone, they're in JPEG, so they'll end in a .jpeg. So the example here would be 2016-11-22 _Boston _Great Bay _1.jpg. Now, when I look at this file, it's pretty easy to sort by the date because the way that the date's set out, if I automatically sort that file, it'll go through and sort it by date. I can actually go to my computer and search for Boston, and all of these photos will show up because Boston's in its own, chunk of line. Or I can search Great Bay and find it pretty easily. And then I can see pretty clearly how many pictures are in that set. And that's only 8 photos to look through to find the thing that I'm looking for. So it's a bit easier. Everybody will come up with something that works for them, and there's no perfect way to name your files. But if you do come up with a schema sort of like this, it's good to come up with it at the beginning of your project. And then a tip I have is if you're working on something, I actually write it down on a Post-it note and have it on my desk at home. So when I'm going through to name all my files, I have that Post-it note reminder to make sure that I'm keeping consistent with the thing that I have set up for myself. So, some tools that are available on your computer already, if you're going through and you're batch renaming files, rather than going through and typing out, the file name 30 times on 30 sets of pictures, you can actually use something that's already built into your computer to rename your files in batch. So this is a screenshot of a Mac computer. If you select files, select the top one, hit Shift, select the bottom one, it'll highlight the photos that you want to look at. And you can right click and choose rename finder items. And you could go through and type in, that prefix that we set up earlier here into that. And then we can start our numbering at 1, and it'll go through and rename those files 1 through 30 using that name that we set up earlier. Mac is good in that it does give you some freedom to customize the way it renames your files. You can decide where you want the number to start at. And then you can also actually add underscores ahead of time. So if you want an underscore between yoga and number 1, you can go ahead and add that underscore there. And it will go through and just rename all of them. Windows computers also have something similar, but they don't give you as much options for customization as Mac computers do. So if you select your images, right click, there's rename. Windows has the default numbering style that uses parentheses, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it has the ability to do that. So if I'm working on a Windows computer, I actually recommend using a third-party renamer rather than the Windows, because it doesn't offer much customization. This program is called Advanced Renamer. It's open source software, it's free, it won't destroy your computer if you download it. But with Advanced Renamer, you can actually customize much further how you rename your files, and that can include custom numbering styles. So if you prefer 001 versus 00001, which is what the Mac computer did earlier. I really like Advanced Renamer. There's a lot of stuff you can play with, and on their website they have some good guides on how to use the software. So it's a good piece of software. Now, you've named your file. Kind of the next thing that people need to think about is how you can store information about your file. Back to the scrapbooking days. Again, I hate scrapbooking. I love my mother, but I hate scrapbooking. You could put your picture on the page and then right underneath what is in the photo, where it was taken, when it was taken. Not necessarily something you can do on with a digital photo. I have seen people take Publisher or open Publisher and put their photos and then type descriptions of each of the photos onto a Publisher page. It seems like a lot of effort to me, but it worked for them. But the thing I actually recommend to people is adding information into your file itself. So most of you are librarians, archivists, you are pretty familiar with the concept of metadata. And most of our customers use metadata every single day. They just may not have the word for it. So metadata, it's defined as a set of data that describes and gives information about other data. So data about data. On your files on your computer, there's already metadata baked into every single file. If you go into any Finder or Explorer on your computer and find a file, you can right click on that file, and at the bottom of it, if it's a Windows, it'll say Properties. If it's a Mac computer, it'll say Get Info. When you open that, it will show you something like this on the screen. You can find under the Details tab information about your files. So say you're looking at a picture that was taken with your cell phone. It'll give you the dimensions of the picture, how many pixels it was, how many pixels or the resolution of the picture. It'll give you information about what type of camera it was taken with. So if it was with your iPhone, it'll say iPhone 11X Max. If it was, loaded in with a scanner, it'll tell you what type of scanner was used. If it was taken with your phone and you had location services turned on when you took the photo, it'll have the exact GPS coordinates of where the picture was taken. which is handy if you don't remember where a picture was taken. It's not as handy if you upload it online and somebody, can find the location of your home using those formats. But the metadata that's baked into these files can be incredibly handy whenever you were trying to organize information about your own files. Some things that you can actually customize in this window, you can rate things. So say you have, 30 pictures of your brother, Jonathan, and, you have like a 5-star photo of Jonathan, and then you have kind of a 2-star photo of Jonathan. You could go through and rate that for whatever reason if you wanted to do that. You can add a title, you can add a subject. And then the thing that I actually recommend that people do is add tags. So I have a pretty big family, and I have a lot of photos that my mom has so lovingly given me to digitize. I love that project so much for me. But when I'm going through and scanning these photos, I often don't know who I'm looking at. I don't know when it was taken, where it was taken. I don't know who's in the photos. So what I do is I actually go sit down with my mom and make her tell me what's in the photo, who's in it, and I will go through and tag every single person that's in the photo. I'll also add information into the notes field, like where it was taken, when it was taken, as much information as I can get. But when you go through and you add information like that into the tags or the comments field, it actually makes this file searchable by the things that you added into the metadata. So say you have 400,000 photos of your family, and you want to find all of the photos of your brother Jonathan, and you've gone through and you tagged all of those photos with Jonathan's name. If you get into your, your file folder here, I could actually search Jonathan and it would pull open all of the files that Jonathan is tagged in. So, not super impressive when you're working with 40 photos, but say you've done this for years and you have 3,000 photos, it can be a big time saver later when you're trying to find pictures of your brother. So metadata, it's basically magic. If people are having kind of a hard time understanding, one illustration that I always take to show them is a library bib record. Go open up your library catalog, find a book, and just show them the section where we have things like subject tags and information that is searchable with the catalog. And if you are lucky enough to have a computer lab at your library, this is actually a class that you can teach hands-on, and that you can have some sample photographs for people, have them go in, try to add their own metadata, and use the search so that they can actually get some hands-on experience with adding these things. And then, after I teach this class, I usually also offer up book a librarian appointments. So if people want to get some hands-on experience with their own stuff, they can bring in their computer, and we'll sit down and make sure they understand the ins and outs of doing it themselves to make it a little more comfortable for them. So metadata, it's awesome. Tell all your friends. Now, moving on from how we name our files, a question that I get a lot is how do I organize my files? So I actually don't organize my files at all into folders because I add metadata to my files. But I know lots of people who have very intricate methods for naming files, file folders, and storing stuff away. If say you have a podcast that you release monthly, you may have a folder on your computer that you name, this is my podcast folder, insert name of podcast. You open your podcast folder and you have years 2016 through 2020. And then within each of those folders, you have the files for each podcast that you put out in 2016 in your 2016 folder. That is a sensible way to organize them. It's pretty easy to find the recordings from particular dates. But say you have, a topic that you talked about, you have a podcast where you talk about family. So you have a family folder in your podcast folder. And then you organize your podcast recordings into the family folder. It can be confusing later if you're trying to find them by date, but they're organized by topic. So whatever you decide to do, don't make it too intricate. I have come up with some really intricate file naming for my folders, and then looked at it 6 months later and been like, what am I looking at? Where are my files? So if you take time to rename your files, if you add the metadata, the search function on your computer can do a lot of heavy lifting for you, which is great. But whatever you do, just you do you. Just do it consistently. Now, a few tips that I have for customers and for others, other staff when they're starting on these projects, is the first one. You don't have to keep everything. This is actually not a popular tip when it comes to a lot of our genealogy customers because they do like to keep everything. But if you are in charge of a library collection or an archive, you have probably had the fun responsibility of weeding. I weed monthly in the collection that I have here at Central Library. We always have to make space for things that are useful, for things that will actually get looked at. And a practical way to make sure you're not keeping everything for the genealogy folks who maybe don't like your suggestion is to pull out your camera on your phone, take a look at your file folder. Did you take 8 photos of the exact same thing? Go through and pick out the photo that you like best from that batch and delete the other 7. You'll save some room in your digital archive, and it'll be less swiping to get through to find your photos. A good second step is to make sure before you start your project to actually inventory your files. If your files are kind of all over the place, go ahead and just pull out a notepad and write down where each of your files are stored, like say your cell phone, your laptop, your memory cards, your flash drives, and kind of make a plan for yourself so that when you get started on digitizing or archiving these things, break it into smaller pieces so it's less daunting. It can be really hard to look at like 5 boxes of photos like I did once. But if you go through and you kind of sort them into like daytime projects, I actually went through and separated all of my files or all of my photos into batches of 100 or like near 100. And if I have some time, I'll just grab a batch, work on it. And then, when I'm done with that batch, I have completed that many photos. So inventory, figure out what steps you want to take first, and it can kind of break up your project into a manageable bite. I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. Tip number 3, update your backups often. If you are backing stuff up to a cloud drive, just make sure you're doing it consistently because you don't want to get 2 years down the line and not have backed up in 2 years. So it's an important step. Step number 4, always save your work in sustainable formats. We'll talk a little bit more about digitization later, but it will save yourself a lot of heartbreak later on if you're updating things into formats that are easily accessible. And then tip number 5, don't get frustrated. People literally have PhDs in information organization. There's journals, there's entire podcasts and all sorts of things dedicated to the topic. So you don't have to be an expert to do it, but just don't get frustrated if it does feel hard. There are some really great resources if you are looking to learn more about personal digital archiving. These books are all linked in this slideshow as well as on the resource page. The one that I really appreciate the most from the professional side is the Complete Guide to Personal Digital Archiving. This was actually put out by ALA Publications, I want to say in 2018, and they go through and they break up into subjects like digital archiving of photographs, how to archive your social media content. And they have some really great information on some libraries that are doing things similar to what we're doing here at Tulsa City County Library. And it's a very manageable book to read. So definitely recommend this one. A book that I often recommend to customers, as well as was really helpful for me, is Melody Condren's Managing the Digital You. We actually purchased a couple copies of this to keep in our collection, and they get used fairly consistently. But she did a really great job of breaking up personal digital archiving and managing your digital content in probably the most accessible way I've seen. She has information on automatic backup services for your computer, which I don't usually go too far into because there's dozens of services. They all cost money. It can be hard to navigate them. But she also talks about file naming and file sorting. So really liked that book. And it's one that I would recommend adding to your collection if this is a question you get from customers often. iDigital is kind of an older book. think it came out in like 2011, but I did enjoy it, and the technology hasn't changed a whole lot since the book came out. And then Donald T. Hawkins has a personal archiving book, and you can actually, I think, find a digital copy of this that has been made available through his website. So I linked to all of those in the presentation, but definitely recommend you check those out. So moving on from personal digital archiving, the next thing I talk about with customers, and if this is something you're looking to do yourself, is digitizing your stuff so that it can be archived online. We at Central Library have a digital literacy lab. In our digital literacy lab, we have digitization equipment that's made available for free to our library users. And the class that I teach monthly, DIY digitization, we actually go through and do hands-on demonstration of each piece of equipment, talk about settings, talk about what type of file it comes out with. Usually for this class, there's a wide variety of understandings between customers. We have somebody who doesn't know a flash drive has digital files on it, to somebody who is an expert, and you're just here to supplement their learning. So walking through the types of resources we have, and again, in this presentation I have linked to where I purchased each of these. So if you're looking to purchase some of this equipment for yourself, if you go to that link I shared earlier and that I will share again later, all of these are live links that will take you to the manufacturer's website for the product. So the first scanner we have here on the left is an Epson Expression 12,000 XL. We purchased this back in 2016, so there are some newer versions of this scanner available. It costs about $3,500, which is pretty pricey for a scanner for a lot of people. But it's a fantastic scanner. The resolution on it can go fairly high, which is great. And we have customers who use this for a variety of uses. Our research department here at Central will digitize newspapers using it because it's got a bit larger of a bed. We have a muralist here in town who will come and scan found objects, and then I saw him put a Cheeto bag on there one time, and he'll take that and layer it into his digital art, and it creates some really cool texture because the resolution is so high. So there's lots of things you can do with it. When I'm working, I usually try to work on this scanner because you can actually lay down multiple photographs on the bed of the scanner, and the software will go through and separate them into different files for you. So if you have 8 photos on the bed, you'll get 8 photo files at the end. So it's a big time saver if you're working on a pretty big batch of scanning. The scanner on the right is an Epson Perfection V500 or 550. This scanner was about $180 when we purchased it, but I think they have these on sale for around $120 or $130 now because there are newer ones out. I think the newest Perfection is about $1,100. So there's lots of different price points. We've had really good luck with both of these scanners. I haven't had any mechanical issues. Really, the only thing we have to do is keep cleaning supplies on hand so that you can wipe down the bed. The Epson Perfection V550 on the right, in addition to doing the things that the other one can do, just on a smaller bed, it can also do negatives. So I wish I had a picture of it, but if you open the lid, there's a thing that you can pop out, and it will create a second window on top of the scanner. And when you put negatives in between the scanner up the window down here and the scan bed, it'll send light through both sides, and it'll turn a negative into a digital image. So you can scan 35mm slides on it. You can scan photo strips if you used to get from Walgreens and a little envelope. Essentially, if you can fit it between the 2 windows, you can scan it and into a photo. So we have 3 of the smaller scanners. The scanners get near pretty much constant use because they are a more popular format for a lot of people. And because we have 3 of them, there's basically always one available. But if you're looking to purchase equipment for your library, I heartily recommend the Epson scanners. We've had really good uses out of them, and they've been pleasant to use. When talking about resolution with customers when they're learning how to use scanners, there's a lot of things to keep in mind, and it's always something I like to walk through with people. What is a TIFF? What is a JPEG? what resolution should I be scanning my stuff in? There's no perfect answer for everybody because a lot of it depends on how much space you have to store your things in and how much money you want to pay for your online storage, and how much you care about the item. There are some national standards that I usually recommend that people look at if they're trying to develop their own, personal digital archiving standard. If you work at an academic library or in an archive, you probably already have archive standards. I know a lot of archives will follow the Northeast Document Conservation Center standards. If you go to their website, they actually have really good resources on archive practices. And they also teach workshops, and they often do some here in Oklahoma. So if you're looking for more information on that, definitely recommend you check out their website. The Library of Congress also has a website devoted to personal digital archiving, and they have some good handouts that you can print out for customers, as well as information on like how to digitize things and video tutorials on like how to organize files. So those have been both really good resources when helping customers understand resolution in particular. We have also in the lab an LP converter and a cassette converter. This will take audio files from either an audio cassette or an LP and convert them over to an MP3. Our LP converter, we spent about $80 on it. It's by Ion. They actually have a version out that we purchased this year, and I don't have an updated photo available, but it has a lid on it. So if you were buying one for a public library in particular, make sure you buy one with a lid. We have a lot of teens who come through and try to scratch using our turntable, which is always very fun for them, but not as fun for the needle. I've purchased a lot of needle replacements for that thing. So the one with the lid is only about $100. Spend the extra $20. You will not regret it. On the right, the cassette converter, that was about $120. And it just hooks up to a computer and converts files over to an MP3. So it is a one-to-one process. If you have 30 minutes of audio, it takes 30 minutes for it to capture it. So it is kind of a lengthy process, but I usually encourage customers to bring a book or find one on the shelf when they're working on projects. We've also got a VHS converter, and this is probably the second most popular piece of equipment we have. The VHS, I say VHS converter, it is literally a VCR that we have a machine hooked into the back, which I'll talk about that in a second. But this machine, I don't know how much we paid for the VCR because I think we found it used. Basically, any VCR in good working order can be used as a VCR converter if you have an Elgato video capture plugged into the back of it, which again, I have on another slide. And then on the right is a VHS-C adapter. This is about $25. I think we bought it on Amazon, but essentially what it does is it takes a VCR tape and it stretches it out so it's the size of a VHS, and it will just play in a regular VCR. So VHS-C. Other size tapes will fit in here, but they won't play. So don't try to force other tapes in there. But it's great for VHS-Cs. And then this is a piece of equipment that I just got, pre-pandemic and have not installed in the lab yet. But we have a mini DV converter, so it'll take mini DV tapes and convert them over to digital files. And the thing that I mentioned earlier, the Elgato video capture, this machine right here, I want to say it's about $80 when we purchased it. Essentially what it does is it connects to the back of whatever machine you're using and sends it to the computer and converts it to a video file. So you can plug this thing into anything. I have two of them in the lab. One of them is connected to the mini DV converter or the mini DV player. And then the second one is connected to our VHS or our VCR. What's great about this thing though, is you can actually connect it to anything that has a playback function. So say you have a camcorder at home, you could actually plug this straight into your camcorder. And if your camcorder has a playback, this will send that playback straight to the computer and convert it to a video file for you. So really great machine. I know some libraries who actually circulate these as part of like their library of things. So if you have a budget for that sort of thing, they're about $80. And all customers need to use them is, a VCR and a computer to connect the two. So it's a great machine. I love it. We've also had ours for about 4 years and they've never broken. So pretty good longevity for a public library machine. And then another piece of equipment we have in here is an 8mm and a Super 8 reel converter. So this will take 8mm and Super 8 reels and convert them over to an MP4 file. This one we purchased for about $290. I found one like basically 20 minutes after I hit purchase on the old one that I like better, that's $400 and can fit larger reels on it. So I think I've linked to both on here. But essentially what this machine does is it takes your 8mm and your Super 8 reels and it feeds them through a slide at a time onto like a tiny little scanner, and then it animates all of those captures together into a video. So I hate video reels, but this machine is great for converting them. About 30 minutes, it'll take about 30 minutes to convert about 5 minutes of video. So it is a very time consuming thing, but most reels only have about 5 minutes of video on them, unless there's some that have been doctored together. So great machine, love this thing. Also have not had a lot of problems with it, which I appreciate. Also at Central Library, we have an audio lab in our makerspace. More libraries are adding these into their spaces. They can be pretty pricey to get set up. But some things that are handy about this one, we offer Pro Tools, Ableton Live, FL Studio, Audacity, and GarageBand. So there's all the software that they could possibly need to do audio editing, as well as some instruments, a mix board, a soundboard, microphones. So we have a lot of people who come into this space to record podcasts, oral histories, and then we have a lot of musicians who come in to, mix and produce music, which is awesome. And if you have questions about that, I would be happy to connect you to our makerspace people who know a lot more about it than I do. And then in our research center at Central Library, which is on the top floor of the building, we have a couple of scanners that I'm sure a lot of libraries have in their building, including a microfiche and a microreel scanner, and then an overhead scanner. The overhead scanner we have, it's not a great scanner. Usually I recommend people take pictures with their cell phone and good angles and good lighting. Can get you usually better resolution. But if you have scanners like this available at your library to staff, you might consider offering them up to patrons, because oftentimes patrons also have these formats that they need to access. So that's all the equipment we have here at Central Library. Usually for my digitization class, we'll tour the lab, we'll hit the makerspace, and then we'll end up on the research floor where we talk about these scanners. And then I usually take it as an opportunity to plug our local history collection. So if you do something like this, always plug your collection, because a lot of people who come to this class are particularly interested in local history and genealogy. So there's usually a good tie-in there as well. And if you are looking to set up your own lab or something similar to it, there's some really great resources online. The Memory Lab, if you have not heard of it, is a space very similar to ours, but it's specifically dedicated to digitization. It started at the DC Public Library. They have a couple memory labs in DC, but they've also started this thing called a Memory Lab Network. So if you have digitization equipment at your library, I actually recommend hooking up with them, because they will include information about your digitization equipment on their lab network map, which is really great. So it can be a good way to connect with potential new users. And if you're looking to start something like it at your own space, they have really good resources on like how to purchase equipment, how to set up equipment, how to use the equipment. And whenever I was looking for new equipment to purchase the last couple of years, I've reached out to their staff there, and they've been really helpful in hooking me up with vendors that I was not able to find on my own. So great resource, and their website has a lot of great information. There's also the Digital Literacy Lab here at Central, where I'm sitting right now. If you ever have questions, please feel free to reach out, and I've linked to our website where I include information about what type of equipment we have, as well as videos that we've created on how to use the equipment, and handouts on how to use the equipment. So good resources. Now, moving on from the digitization, and kind of the last thing we'll talk about briefly is digital estate planning. Digital estate planning is something that is new for a lot of people. Estate planning has been done for, hundreds of years, but digital estate planning is something that was born out of the last, 20, 30 years. And the class that I teach is kind of the final class in the Saving Stuff series that I mentioned earlier. We call it Online Legacies and Digital Estate Planning. This is actually developed from an article by Jessamine West and another article by Jan Zastrow that were also in Computers and Libraries. And it's kind of broken down into two pieces. There's online legacy, so the stuff that is saved about you on the internet, and then digital estate planning, how to organize your digital assets and accounts in a way that they can be passed on easily after you pass. So the first part of the class, we actually talk about the online legacies bit. Here on the screen, on the right-hand side, I have a chart called resources. This is actually straight from an article by Jessamine West that she wrote in 2017, where she kind of gathered information on different places that you can find information about yourself online. It used to be that if you wanted to find works by somebody, say you are a writer or an essayist, and somebody wanted to find information about you, you either had to have a biography published about you, an autobiography, a database record, or say somebody had to go to the library and see if they could find your stuff. Now it's pretty easy to Google somebody and maybe find the blog that they had when they were 14 years old, or get onto their Twitter account and see all of their tweets. There are some resources that are available in those social media accounts that will actually let you harvest information from them. So say you have a Facebook page and you want to download all of your Facebook statuses, since you created your Facebook in 2007. They actually have on their website a place where you can go and export all of your data in batch, puts it into like this really nasty Excel form, but it'll pull out all of the stuff that you've written, for the last 13 years. I have a friend who writes updates every day, and I swear you could take them and put them in a book and illustrate it, and it would just be the loveliest coffee book table. So, she's a writer. Maybe she'll want to do that someday. She could actually go through to Facebook and download that stuff in batch, which is really handy. There's also some great resources for, say you did have a blog back in 2012, but you stopped paying for the domain name and you don't have access to it anymore. This is a resource, the Wayback Machine, that I recommend to people all the time. If you go to archive.org, at the top, they have the Wayback Machine, and you can actually search to see, oh, I did not mean to do that. Okay. You can actually take a look and see what the internet looked like in history. So I use the Wayback Machine here to look up tulsalibrary.org, a website I go to daily, and I'm sure some of you also do, or maybe not. You can search your website domain, and it'll find basically snapshots of what that web page looked like in history. Now, not every website is going to be available on the Wayback Machine, and not every subpage of a website is available on here, but I was able to find from January 25th, 1999, a version of the Tulsa City County Library System website that looks very different than our website today, but I could actually go in and see what events we had going on that year in 1999. So, if you're looking to archive maybe posts from an old blog you used to run, you might be able to find some of that information on here to export it and save it. So just something to consider. Now, social media accounts, most of us use them or have any combination of them, and every social media site is different. Facebook is just one example that I talk about with people, especially a lot of the customers who attend this particular class are a little older, and a lot of them do have Facebook accounts to keep up with family. There's actually a really great resource that Facebook has put together called a legacy contact. So with Facebook, you can actually go in and you can go into your settings and assign a legacy account or a legacy contact. It does have to be somebody who has a Facebook account, but essentially you can assign them to take care of your account at your passing. So a legacy contact can do one of two things. You can give them access to your account and give them instructions on what you want them to do. So for example, my legacy contact I have set to be my brother and my sister, not my other brother, just the two siblings I like the most. And they have instructions, if I pass, to download my data from Facebook, get whatever pictures they want, and then to delete my account. But they also have an option on here where you can memorialize an account, where essentially it'll turn your Facebook into a memorial for you. And rather than saying Caitlin Seagraves, it'll say remembering Caitlin Seagraves. I personally do not like the creepy Facebook accounts that exist in the world after somebody passes, but if you do, you can stop confusing people and put remembering Caitlin Seagraves on it. And that's just something that Facebook has built in to their service. So like I said, every social media platform is different. And if you're looking for information on it, this is a good graph that has some good links to support articles on how to do that sort of thing. Now, as I said earlier, this class is called Online Legacies in Digital Estate Planning. So I'm going to spend some time talking about digital estate planning, but I'm not going to spend the 90 minutes that I usually spend talking about it because it is kind of an in-depth process. But with digital estate planning, we've kind of broken it up into 5 steps that customers can take when they are working on developing their own digital estate plan. And one thing that I did is actually created like a 6-page document that I give to customers when they attend this class that they can take home. And it has places where they can write in information, and it's almost like kind of a worksheet that they can take home and work on. And I outline a lot of these steps. But the first one, when you're working on your digital estate plan, is to make a list of your digital assets and accounts and how you can access each one. So your digital assets and accounts can be any number of things, and they can be stored on any number of things. So, if you're making a list of your assets, you'll want to list things like your computer, your cell phone, your flash drives, your memory cards. And then if you're making a list of your accounts, you'll want to list everything from like your Netflix account to your Google Drive account to, financial or banking accounts and that sort of thing. And a good reason to kind of think about this, prior to a lot of the customers, this is always super awkward to talk about because, estate planning is kind of a macabre topic, but, most of the people who attend this class are either older and thinking about, end of life planning, or they are people who have maybe parents who are looking at end of life planning and they're trying to get stuff together for them. This actually came, I started looking into this myself because my father was sick and he was the one who used to take care of all the financial stuff for my family. So he was unable to pay the mortgage because he was in the hospital, and my mom had to figure out how to access all of her financial accounts so she could, pay the bills. So when you're developing a digital estate plan, you really want to make sure that you're developing it with in mind of like who's going to be using it and include the accounts that you want them to have access to in your digital estate plan. So step 1, list everything out and how to get into it. This can include things like the password for the account, the username, security questions. It can take a while. Step 2 is decide what you want done with those assets. So say you've listed out, your Facebook account, all of the photos that you keep in your Google Drive. The next step will be to decide what you want done with those assets. So maybe you want your photos to be shared with all of your siblings and your cousins. You would write that out in your digital estate plan. Step 3 is to name a digital executor. A digital executor is somebody who needs to be highly organized and detail-oriented. Oftentimes, digital estate plans can be, 30 pages long. You want it to be somebody who is not going to skip any steps. You also make sure it's somebody who is committed to actually executing your digital estate plan. And then lastly, you'll want to make sure it's somebody who's very comfortable with technology and the internet. If you give it to your sister who doesn't know how to log into Facebook, she may have trouble executing your digital estate plan. So just some things to keep in mind. Step 4 is to store the information in a secure and accessible location. So your digital estate plan is usually a separate document from your will. If you've created an estate plan for yourself with your lawyer, usually at your passing, your estate plans will go into public record, or your wills go into public record. So this is kind of a document that is separate from your will, and you can store it any number of ways. The way that I usually recommend to people is on an encrypted flash drive that you store in like a lockbox somewhere, or at the bank or in your fireproof safe. You can also store it with an attorney, or they have online storage services specifically for digital estate planning. And I've got a resource later that talks a bit more about those. But, some people, if they're not as familiar with technology or as comfortable with it, keep their digital estate plan on a notepad they store in a fireproof safe at home. Whatever you decide to do, make sure it's something that you update often, especially as access to accounts change pretty regularly. And then kind of the last step is to make it legal. So if you develop your own digital estate plan, to put it into your will is actually fairly simple. You really just have to add some language to your will. And because it's referencing an external document, you don't have to update your will every time you update your digital estate plan. So here is some sample language. I have prepared a memorandum with instructions concerning my digital assets and their access. I direct my executor and beneficiaries to follow my instructions concerning my digital assets. So that's just like 2 sentences that you tack in there. If you have a lawyer that you're working with for your will, and you probably should, they probably already have language put together on this, or if they need it, this is just a good quick example of something you could add. Now, when it comes to laws regarding digital estate plans, it's kind of the Wild West out there, because it is kind of a newer thing. Back in 2015, the revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act was approved. And I'm sorry, this is terrible words, but National Conference of Commissioners on Uniform State Laws. So basically, there's a bunch of people who get together annually and put together uniform state laws that they then try to take back to their state legislatures and try to get passed at the state level, because so many of these laws are state by state. So the UFADA Act, I'm going to call it UFTA, was put together back in 2015. Only a few states have enacted it at the state level. Oklahoma is not one of them. But basically, it allows fiduciaries to manage digital property like computer files, web domains, and virtual currency, but restricts access to electronic communications unless the original user consented in a will, trust, power of attorney, or other record. So basically, if this law is enacted at the state level, it gives your digital executor the legal ability to execute your digital estate plan. Now, in Oklahoma, we only have one law on the books that I could find related to digital assets and accounts. This was passed back in 2010. It's House Bill 2800, and it allows for your executor to have control of social networking, microblogging, or email accounts, provided that it is explicitly stated in your will. So unless you explicitly give it access to it, your executor cannot access these things. And that's really the only law that's in place in Oklahoma that I have been able to find. Now, we have had some legislators try to introduce that UFTA Act earlier we looked at the state level. Back in 2016, it was introduced, but it kind of died on the floor. Back in 2008, Senator Duggar from District 21, he's a CPA, so he has kind of an inherent interest in financial stuff, put it to the Senate, and I think it got put over into the Finance Committee and then kind of died out before they were able to get it back to the Senate floor to vote on. If you have an interest in seeing something like this passed at the state level, I encourage you to reach out to your legislators, and a good effective way to get something like this passed would be to directly contact the Finance Committee and those who serve on it. So, if this is something you'd like to see in Oklahoma, sending them language about this this Uniform Act that was, put together in 2015, could be a way to advocate for having that law passed in Oklahoma. So that's kind of all I have been able to find up to this point. I didn't see that anything was introduced this legislative season in regards to it, but maybe they will next time. Now, if you want to learn more about digital estate planning, there's a couple of great resources. Your Digital Afterlife is actually kind of an older book, but again, the technology has not changed a whole lot since it came out. And the Digital Beyond is a really great website. They have some really good sample language for writing this sort of thing into your will, as well as like resources for working on digital estate planning. And then I've put together a toolkit for both my digital archiving class as well as my digital estate planning class, where I include handouts, presentation, as well as like some of the resources I used when putting the talks together. I also have these classes that I've taught recorded and available on the Tulsa Library YouTube page. So customers can watch them, and if you ever have an interest in handing them out to your customers, you don't have to recreate the will, you can just send them my video. But I have all of those available, again, in this presentation. So, this was just kind of an overview of a series of classes that we teach at Tulsa Library and have had very good success with. We always get really good turnout, and it always sparks some really interesting conversation with our customers, and it's a good way to plug, other library resources. If you have an interest in any of these other classes that I've taught, just let me know. I'd be happy to send you materials for them. But that is kind of the end of my spiel. So is there any questions? Allison, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, well, you did a really great job of explaining everything, and it's really interesting. And actually, I'm sitting in here with our library director, and she's going to be upset because, now I'm going to have to ask her if we can go buy some of this equipment. But
that's great.
For these smaller libraries who might not, have a big budget to dedicate to digitization, what do you think, starting out just to see if it's successful, what are the most important pieces of equipment that you really need to have to get started?
Yeah, so probably the two pieces of equipment that we get requests for most often are scanners and our VHS converter. If you're looking to purchase a scanner for your library, the Epson Perfection that I mentioned earlier, the smaller scanner, it's under $150 if you get one of the older versions. And it's a really hardy machine. The ones we've had have lasted us 4 years now. We haven't had any mechanical issues with them, and they are by far the most popular resource we have. And because they are versatile, can do both like photographs as well as negatives, they get a lot of use. The VHS player or the VHS converter is a question we get a lot about. And if you have a used VCR, you may be laying around your house or you run into it at a flea market, all you really need to use that is the Elgato video capture, which is about $80. So, those are kind of the lowest price points for equipment we have, but also the most popular equipment we have.
Okay, so say you did buy like the VCR converter and you have people that bring in their VHS tapes and stuff, and then something happens, like, they're probably older, they get damaged. How do you handle that?
Yeah, so anybody who uses our space does have to sign a waiver. The waiver says that we're not held responsible for anything breaking. So that is the first thing I like to point out when people use the equipment. The second one, a good practice in any library situation is to never take a device from a customer. So if somebody needs help with their cell phone, I let them be the driver and let them handle the materials. Probably the thing that we've run into the most is tape breaking. If it's older, 30, 40 years old, and you're running it through a machine for the first time, it can be brittle, it can snap. There's some really great tutorials online on like how to repair those things. And really all you need is a tiny screwdriver and some Scotch tape to repair some of those things. I've gotten very adept at taping things back together. But generally people are pretty understanding and have not had any like run-ins or anything, like no dramatic situations where people were just absolutely devastated. So waivers are my first recommendation.
Okay, so one of the things that you had mentioned at the beginning was having people bring like family photos in and repairing them on Photoshop.
Mhm.
I know that Photoshop might be more expensive, so do you have any more budget-friendly options or maybe open access options that you would recommend just for getting started?
Yeah, of course. So GIMP is a image editor that you can download. It's an open source software that actually looks very similar to Photoshop and has a lot of the same correction tools. I actually have a full list of image editing options, and I don't remember all of them, but I can add them to my follow-up questions document that I'll add to the drive. So it's a good question.
And then is there an example of the waiver that you guys have? Is there an example of that in your document that you had created maybe to help people with kind of the wording and stuff if they're interested in that?
Yeah, so if you go to tulsalibrary.org/about, we have all of our policies, and it includes a waiver for the Digital Literacy Lab, but I can add that to the drive as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that that is all that I have. And if you guys are interested in reaching out to Caitlin, we will have her email address. Oh, see, there she goes. She has it on there ready to go. So feel free to reach out to her and she can answer any questions. I mean, this was a wonderful presentation. I think it's very timely. And it's, a great way. I'm sure people have had time to go through photographs during, quarantine and all this stuff. So it's a good way to learn how to digitize them. So again, thank you so much, Caitlin, for presenting. Thank you all so much for watching this presentation. If you enjoyed it, please consider joining the Public Library Division of OLA. We do meetings like this once a month. We do a different topic every month. Most of it pertains to public libraries and gives you useful information like this. And then please remember to fill out your session evaluations. So we hope to see you at more sessions, and everyone have a great day.